Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to talk about filter bubbles. I recently did some research on YouTube regarding pellet grills and specifically how to barbecue on them. And now, whenever I open YouTube and I go to that home screen, it shows me a curated list of different types of barbecuing methods and different types of pellet grills. And I find that really interesting. Maybe you've noticed something like I've noticed. I could be scrolling on either Facebook, or I could be looking at YouTube, or I could be doing a Google search, and maybe I'll read an article. In that article, perhaps it was leaning into sort of an ideology. Maybe it was leaning a left-leaning ideology, or it was a right-leaning ideology. It really doesn't matter. What I notice following that is that it begins to curate more of those types of articles for me. And so if I tend to lean left in my thinking, then I find more articles that are leaning left. If I find that I'm more right in my leaning, then I find more articles that are right. What happens is that there seems to be this curating process. And I find that really, really interesting. Maybe you've clicked an article that leans towards a particular ideology. Maybe it's left, maybe it's right. It really doesn't matter at this point. What does matter is that typically what you find shortly thereafter is that there are curated articles specifically for you. In your Facebook feed, maybe on YouTube, or even in your Google searches, you're going to find things that are going to lean to whatever direction it is that you have a tendency to move in regarding the articles that you read. So if you lean left politically, you're going to get more left-leaning articles. If you lean right politically, you're going to get more right-leaning articles. And the same is true of any of the hobbies and interests that you have. These things are going to get curated for you based on your search and based on some kind of predictive measures that an algorithm is using to find what they think you may appreciate. So it brings me to a question that I'd love to see you post in the comments about. What is something that's shown up in your feed that you know for a fact you have not searched for? Now, for the remainder of this particular video, I want to let you know that I have provided links and some research tools for you as we look forward looking at the topic of filter bubbles. So just check out in the description below, and you'll find all the links that I've come across, and hopefully it's a well-balanced view on this particular topic. And if there is anything I'm missing, please feel free to make a comment to let me know. That way we can have a better rounded conversation about this. Recently, I watched a documentary called The Social Dilemma, and I'm just going to read to you what they say this documentary is intended to do. It attempts to expose the ways in which technology giants have manipulated human psychology to influence how we behave and believe. Roger Ebert says it this way. His comment is, the more we learn about the insidiousness that underlies social media in the new documentary, The Social Dilemma, the more it seems like the film is bringing a slingshot to a nuclear war. What we learn in this movie is that our brains are being manipulated and even rewired by algorithms that are designed to get our attention and make us buy things, including, get this, buying into distorted ideas about the world, ourselves, and each other. That just sounds nuts to me. And then I figured, okay, so this is one guy's opinion. What do other people say out there? And so DigitalSpy actually also has a review on it. And it says, according to the documentary, this information, talking about the information about our clicks and about our searches, this information feeds the algorithm and informs what content we will be served with at a later date. And again, with the aim of keeping us engaged for longer periods of time. And so the idea is keeping us engaged on the screen more frequently and for longer times in order to be able to create a more predictive model in terms of what to get us to, buy, whether that's buying into an ideology or buying a product. And it also says here, it doesn't stop with the individual either, as the ripple effects reach so much further. And as a result, the algorithms and preferences, our individual social media feeds can become echo chambers, basically reaffirming everyone's worldview over and over, and most worrying, perhaps even at the expense of objective truth. I heard somebody suggest the idea that fake news travels 6 times faster than real news over social media. And apparently the reason behind that is that it tends to be more emotion based. And so it just draws something out of us, causes us to share it, causes our friends to then see it and share it, and it just blows up. And so this brings us to the idea of something called the filter bubble. Now, I hadn't heard this term before. I came across this term in this documentary, and I wanted to do a little more research on it. And, the term's been around for a little while. It actually refers to the algorithms that dictate what we encounter online. And now, don't miss this. This is critical. It dictates what we encounter online. Now, I have to admit, I've been a little naive about this. My figuring was I type into Google search engine and I'm going to get the same kind of results that anybody else would get. But in fact, that's actually not true. When I type into a Google search, the other things that are taken into account are what are the other things that people in my region were looking for? What are my leanings? What does the algorithm think I'm looking for as a potential outcome? And so I could be doing a search on masks, for example, and it'll bring up all kinds of articles and information and protests and all sorts of things that might come along as it relates to masks. And not all of that is something that I've searched. It's also searched by the people who are in the region that I'm in. And so it attempts to predict certain things for me and actually dictate the information that comes my way. So for example, here's another one. Facebook's algorithms produce curated streams of news based on what a user and their friends have liked. And the Wall Street Journal actually documented this in a project comparing conservative and liberal Facebook experiences. So if you're conservative, in Facebook, you will see more conservative-leaning videos, comments, articles, ads, and the same is true if you are liberal-leaning. You will see more videos, posts, ads. And what I find interesting about this, and the important note, is that we're not just receiving information that defends a particular point of view or a particular position. We're actually receiving information that also villainizes those who have an opposing view to us. So what we see is that the liberal left, as it is called, are being villainized. We see the conservative right, as it is called, also being villainized. And it creates this space where it's actually incredibly manipulative because we start to see somebody as something other. We see them based on their ideas, not based on who they are. And it's difficult for us to come back together. It's extremely manipulative. According to Eli Pariser, he's the author of The Filter Bubble, those algorithms create a unique universe of information for each of us, which fundamentally alters the way we encounter ideas and information. Now, in a healthy society, ideas and information go back and forth, and we have opposing views, and then we come together and we have authentic, genuine debate over the topics, and hopefully are able to produce some kind of meaningful conclusion. And that is not the case in this. We're forced out of that arena and into a different arena where we only hear people that have the same kinds of views as us. It says here, the filter bubble phenomena can lead to a condition of disconnect, which I just mentioned, as people become unable to understand how people could have different perspectives from themselves. Curating the information to what we see rather than what we need to see will cause long-term problems. And actually, I suggest to you that it's going to cause a breakdown in our ability to be able to communicate thoughtfully with ideas that are probably worth exploring in some levels. We will immediately dismiss things on the basis of somebody's ideological perspective rather than on the merit of the idea. It also says here, according to Eli, the detrimental effects of the filter bubbles include harm to the general society in the sense that they have the possibility of undermining civic discourse and making people more vulnerable to propaganda and manipulation. That just blew me away right there. The idea that people are more vulnerable to propaganda and manipulation. So Parasur's TED Talks are entitled Beware Online Filter Bubbles, and I encourage you to check that out. It's actually a really interesting TED Talk, and I'm not going to lie to you, it's troubling, to say the least, in terms of there's a downside to technology as much as there is an upside. So filter bubbles have a tendency to lead us towards polarizing positions that divide us from one another, and they really do leave little room for us to be able to come back together and, again, have that meaningful discourse, meaningful conversations that challenge us and grow us. And so the more we lean towards the curated information, the more extreme that curated information becomes. And all of a sudden, we've just really demonized everybody else that doesn't agree with us. And that's a really hostile world to live in. And it explains an awful lot in terms of the language that we often see from people on social media. And so I want to suggest to you this. We need to be smarter and better than expected. It's important that we be sure that we're not being manipulated into adopting ideologies that are determined by propaganda attempting to reach us. As people of faith, this becomes really important. Our starting point has a tendency to be more polarizing because we believe in what we call a biblical worldview. And in this biblical worldview, it contends that there is dark and there is light. It contends that there is good and there is evil. And it defines those fairly well, and the difficulty is that how it defines those are not always equal to how the rest of society defines it. So we start from a place that tends to be a little bit more polarizing. But I truly believe that the answer to the world's problems are ultimately found in the one who created the world. The reality is that there are views that we hold to that are true, and especially for those of us who call ourselves followers of Jesus, there are those truths that we just hang on that really govern how we interact with the world around us. And it means that we function in this place of tension. On the one hand, we want to be able to hear people's ideas, and on the other hand, we have this thing that we call absolute truth that governs or should govern our thinking and our movement forward. And so we hold those in tension with each other. So my encouragement then would be this. If you are a follower of Jesus, then it would be really good to hold on to something like this. In essentials, unity. In non-essentials, charity. And in all things, Jesus. In essential doctrines, we want to have unity with one another. Who is Jesus? Who is God the Father? Like the whole Godhead. What is the role of the church? What's the nature of sin? These are things that are essential to the Christian faith, and they often help us figure out ways forward in terms of how we interact with the world around us. In non-essentials, these are the things that are not salvation issues. We want to offer charity to each other. These are the things that they're not about good doctrine necessarily. They are about our preferences very often. And so in those things, we want to offer charity to each other. You may understand something slightly different than me, and because it's not a salvation issue, there's room for us to have dialogue. So in non-essentials, charity. And in all things, we got to remember that we represent Jesus. And as representatives of Jesus, he says that the world will know that we are his disciples by our love for one another. And so as representatives of Jesus, we lead with love for one another because that's our testimony both to each other and to the world around us. And it's a command. And that's one of those biblical worldviews that we hold to. There's a command for us to love one another in this thing we call the Christian faith. Perhaps it would be also good to note that there are people that we're going to interact with that don't hold to a Christian faith, do not have Judeo-Christian values, and partly it's because the world is just changing around us. So in those situations, I really believe it's important for us to have the same posture as Jesus. Here's what I mean. John 3:17. A lot of us know John 3:16. Here's John 3:17. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. And so our posture needs to be one that is not condemning. We don't do that. That is not what we're about. It's not what he's about. And if he's not about that, I shouldn't be about that. And as a matter of fact, we read in 1 John chapter 2, verse 6, that those who claim to be in Jesus must walk as Jesus walked. We got to live like Jesus lived. And if Jesus lived a non-condemning life, then we need to lead a non-condemning life as we're interacting with those people who are not people of faith. Now, we got to remember that that's not to the exclusion of not communicating truth, right? We're still going to communicate truth. We're going to talk about who Jesus is, that sort of thing, but not from a position of condemnation. We start with love because Jesus did. 1 Peter 3:15, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord, always being prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give reason for the hope that you have. And that's often where people stop reading. But listen to this next line. But do so with gentleness and respect. Gentleness and respect. That is how we are to interact with a non-Christian world. And, it's one of those things that if we hold on to a biblical worldview and we apply reasonable positive message, I think that we're going to have more consistency in terms of our online experience and more consistency in our experience with people that we interact with, but we're also going to have some clarity in navigating this incredibly troubling trend. I want us to reflect on our use of social media, and even actually just our social network, both online and in person, and ask ourselves some key questions. And I think this is really important as we want to keep our minds moving. We want to keep them growing, and they don't typically grow if we're only hearing voices that agree with us. We need to be challenged. And it's not challenged from the perspective of maybe necessarily changing our minds, but it's challenged from the perspective of growing our minds so that we have a better answer to the things that are coming our way. So how diverse are the opinions and the conversations with those that you have in your network that you spend most of your time with? How diverse is it? Is everyone thinking the same way? Is everybody having the same conversations? Are you a person that is able to be disagreed with and still be friends? That is critical. I mean, at that point, that's talking about emotional maturity, and we'll have a video on that later on sometime. But it's this idea of, can someone even disagree with you in a way that can be healthy to a conversation? Number 2, how might you challenge yourself to understand different thoughts about the world around you? What are the different things that you think you can do to try and understand the different thoughts of the world around you? I'd be curious to see what your thoughts are on that. Feel free to throw some comments down below so that I can maybe learn from you as well. But it's really important that we understand that we live in a world of diversity. We live in a world with diverse thoughts, diverse feelings, and for the most part, I would say that my personal experience with people, even in this diverse world, is that everyone wants fairly similar outcomes. I'll give you an example of what I mean. I truly believe that the vast majority of people believe things like racism are wrong. Now, we may have different ideas on what it looks like and how to get to a place where it's eradicated. But our starting place, or actually our ending place, is probably similar. We just don't want it. And so we want to get rid of those kinds of things. But we may not have the same starting place, and we may have different tensions in those kinds of conversations. It's really important that we still have those conversations so that we can all grow towards a better way forward. We want to get rid of filter bubbles because filter bubbles do not help us as a society. They certainly don't help us as people of faith because we all will have a tendency to enter into that thing called that echo chamber, where we're only hearing the things that we want to hear, and it takes us further down a road and further away from each other. And we just don't want that. So take a look at it, evaluate it, and I'm really curious to hear about what you're finding would be good ways forward for you personally as you're coming out on the other end of this. But the filter bubble is something that I believe that all of us need to avoid. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you like this video, please hit the like button. And if you want to get more information about the kinds of videos that we do, certainly check out the About section of this channel. Also, if you want more videos and you want to be notified when these things are taking place, then hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon, and it will notify you whenever there's a new video popping up. And again, really important, whatever has your attention has your direction.